Aijaz Ahmad's essay Jameson's Rhetoric of Otherness and the National Allegory is a response to Jameson's influential argument that all third world literature should be read as national allegory. Jameson had suggested that while literature from the West is marked by individual experience and private consciousness, literature from the third world is inevitably collective, representing the struggles of whole nations against colonialism, imperialism, and underdevelopment. Ahmad admires Jameson as a major literary critic, but strongly disagrees with this claim, seeing it as reductive, homogenizing, and shaped by a first world gaze. Ahmad begins by noting the problem of generalization. Jameson takes an enormously diverse body of writing produced in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, compresses it into a single category, third world literature. This category assumes that writers from these regions share the same conditions, experiences, and forms of expression. Ahmad argues that this is simply not true. There are multiple histories, languages, classes, and aesthetic traditions in the so-called third world. Treating all of them as producing national allegory erases their complexity. He also challenges the idea that first world literature is somehow different because it is about private life. Western literatures are deeply engaged with ethics and collective identity. One can find many examples such as Dickens or Steinbeck, where literature clearly reflects social struggles. By contrast, not every third world text is political or allegorical. Ahmad points out that to force them into this mold is to misunderstand the richness of their traditions. An important issue in Ahmad's critique is Jameson's use of otherness. Jameson positions the third world as radically different from the West, as if it exists outside modernity and must always be read in terms of its opposition. Ahmad rejects this. He argues that the so-called third world is not some distant other, but part of the same world system shaped by capitalism. Writers in these regions are not outside modernity, they are deeply embedded within it, negotiating its contradictions in their own ways. To claim otherwise is to exoticize them. Ahmad also stresses the ideological dimension. He notes that the texts are never produced under a single condition. They emerge from multiple overlapping forces such as class, gender, race, and nation. For literature or black literature in the United States cannot be nearly separated from first or third world categories. They demonstrate that within the so-called first world, there are also third worlds or marginalized voices. Similarly, third world texts may not always align neatly with nationalist struggles. They can also express other forms of identity and resistance. Another problem Ahmad identifies is Jameson's reliance on a tripartite model of the world, first, second, and third. Ahmad finds this outdated and misleading. It does not account for the uneven complex social realities within each region. For example, India has both advanced capitalist sectors and deeply traditional communities. To simply call it third world and then reduce all its literature to national allegory is to miss these contradictions. He further points out that Jameson's theory reveals a contradiction while it seeks to be anti-Eurocentric by valuing third world literature. It ends up reinforcing Eurocentrism. By imposing a single interpretive framework from the West, Jameson overlooks the self-definitions and literary histories of those cultures. The result is a paternalistic gesture. Third world texts are seen as politically valuable, but only through the lens of a Western critic. Ahmad insists that literary traditions must be read on their own terms, not forced into categories that suit Western theory. At the same time, Ahmad also acknowledges the importance of Jameson's attempt to think about world literature in relation to global capitalism. He shares Jameson's concern that literature should be taught beyond a narrow Western canon. Ahmad calls for a greater precision, sensitivity, and respect for diversity. Instead of speaking of third world literature in general, critics should study particular literatures, Urdu, Arabic, Latin, American, Spanish, within their specific histories. Only then can we understand how they engage with capitalism, nationalism, and culture. Toward the end of the essay, his own position, he emphasizes that both he and Jameson are products of the same global struggles between capital and labor. Their texts are not opposites in some civilizational sense, rather, they represent different locations within a shared world. Ahmad concludes that we must abandon rigid binaries like first versus third world and think instead about the complex, uneven, and interconnected nature of